So welcome everyone. We are excited today to let everyone know that we are releasing a new study from the State Chamber Research Foundation. This is part of our continuing effort to look at economic competitiveness for the state, where we fit in the region and in the country, and try to learn from some of the best practices in other states and replicate that here where it's appropriate. So a little bit about the State Chamber Research Foundation. We are the data and research arm of the State Chamber. As a nonprofit, we're a nonpartisan organization, and our focus is on economic competitiveness and making Oklahoma a great state to do business. So I'd like to welcome Brian Nottingham, who's the author of our latest report, which is called Competing for Mega Projects, a roadmap for attracting transformational investments in Oklahoma. Brian is with Thomas P. Miller and Associates, and I'll let him describe his background and the work that TPMA does, and then we can get into what we found in the study.
Thank you, Ben. As you indicated, my name is Brian Nottingham. I work for Thomas P. Miller and Associates. Prior to joining the firm, I spent almost 5 years as the director for the Labor Market Information / Business Intelligence Division for the state of South Carolina's Department of Employment and Workforce. I have extensive background in research and analysis, which fits in really well with Thomas P. Miller and Associates. We provide all kinds of services. Research is a big part of it to inform strategic planning. We do outreach services. We do business development work. We help with workforce development, strategic planning, and actual program construction and delivery, as well as economic development incentives and working with the business community directly. So really excited to be here. It was a great topic, and it was wonderful to dig into it with Ben and the team from the State Chamber.
So Brian does work all around the country, and his firm does as well. And so they have a very good read on what the trends in the broader economy are, but also specifically with economic development efforts in states and cities and around the country. So Brian, maybe talk about some of those emerging trends, and in particular, the emergence of the mega projects, as we're calling it in this report.
Yes, sir. That's I think is the key one. As part of our research, we did a quick whirlwind tour of what's been happening across the country in the last year, 18 months. And the mega site or mega projects, those that have the potential to crack billions of dollars into the economy and employ thousands and thousands of people, have really been leading the way in the last 18 months. Lots of big projects have been announced all over the country. And of course, this is particularly timely, as one of the other big trends we found was sort of the supply chain struggles that we've been faced with since COVID. There's a lot of emphasis in these states and these mega site occupants to sort of shorten their supply chains, that is, not be so dependent on big shipping delays and things shipped from around the country. So we're seeing more and more states that are putting together competitive incentive packages, not only to attract a mega site occupant with a big project, billions of dollars in investment, but also to bring along their supply chain as well. So they're taking particular interest in making sure they're incentivizing that, so the mega site employers can have the folks that they need handy with good transportation networks and no shipping delays. Those are the two big takeaways that we saw from this, was the mega sites and shortening the supply chain. And also training is sort of a third, I guess, sort of ancillary point, that these more and more high-tech jobs, high-skilled occupations, oftentimes these states are including incentive packages that include on-site training options, either a partnership with a community technical college or even with individualized unique curriculum developed in partnership with the employer. So they're cranking lots of workforce dollars in there as well to make sure the workforce is trained up and ready to go. Exciting time, but those are the three big things I would emphasize, Ben.
And you define this in the report a little bit, but when we talk about a mega project, these truly are like generational type investments. I know the example of the Intel facility that was built in Ohio that the state there was able to recruit to the state, on the order of, I think, $6 billion of investment. Maybe talk about how these mega projects can really transform a local economy or even a state economy.
No, that's right. And lots of states, and I'll take a little bit of a tangent here, lots of states actually incentivize these projects. You get escalators and additional funding and additional incentives if you locate in a rural or an economically distressed area. So states are becoming very intentional about the transformative power of these mega projects. And exactly as you indicated, if one of these pops up in an area that perhaps had high unemployment, low labor force participation rate, also dealing with the brain drain, that's a hot topic with recent local college grads having to travel to other parts of the country to find good work. These mega projects are a way to keep those jobs here, raise the standard of living, and essentially a rising tide lifts all ships, right? So the dollars get cranked into the economy. It's not just the amount of jobs and the generational changing, fortune that can be brought along for the workforce itself, but it's also the trickle down impact. We've mentioned the supply chains already. These are good jobs that are going to be there for a long while. And then when you start talking about the earnings and folks that are actually making this money, staying in the community, cranking it back in, you see a rise of all of these indirect jobs coming to support them as well. So really, when we talk about billions of dollars of direct investment for these mega sites, that's really just the tip of the iceberg. That's the direct infusion of cash. But when you start trickling down over the course of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, it can have transformational power for a region.
Yeah, and I think what's really highlighted well in the report is you begin to see with these projects some momentum build in the state. And so it actually helps with existing challenges that businesses that are already in the state face. For example, workforce, which we know and hear a lot from our chamber members, is a big challenge for businesses that are already here. And so sometimes there's a little concern about, well, these big projects come in, is that going to strain our workforce system? What's interesting that we've seen in other states is that actually it alleviates some of those challenges over time because of just the momentum that is building around a project like that. So, well, let's get into a little bit what it is that states are doing to try to attract these projects. It's, they're enormous projects in and of themselves, but there's sort of this very targeted area of economic development, if I understand it correctly. So what are other states doing, and what has Oklahoma done?
Sure. So in terms of the mega site development and the mega site incentives, that's something that is unique, and I think a really good opportunity for Oklahoma to really implement their own mega site incentives. Of course, you've had the quality jobs programs in existence there for some time, and they're really flexible, great return on investment. I mean, that's a rare thing. As part of our research, we saw lots of states that struggled with this, where they're not really getting their money back. That's not the case for Oklahoma. Oklahoma has had a really great return on investment for these quality jobs initiatives. But what's happening is some of these other states, and the ones we highlight in this report, are ratcheting up those incentives even higher. They're recognizing the transformational power of these mega projects. So they go through and they carve out special earmarks and special escalators to help attract these projects to their state. We've seen a lot of that happen. Of course, Georgia has a great incentive program in place they've leveraged for years, very flexible, and they can do things like that. Kansas is another great example of legislation that just came online that was explicitly designed to promote landing these mega site projects. As I remember the testimony leading up and the consideration of the bill, they'd indicated that of the last 11 times they've had a look, they've got 0 of them. And they really landed on this lack of a mega site specialized incentive package as a hindrance in landing these projects. So you see lots of other states really focusing on that, adding in these additional escalators, again, in recognition of the transformational power of these projects. So I think that's the big thing to hit on. But the other thing too is industry diversification. States, and Oklahoma has a great track record of this as well. If you look back at some of the incentives for the entertainment industry, so the filmmaking and movie making industry, we've gone down this road before where you take a real concerted, careful look at diversification efforts within a state. And of course, states now are trending towards these research-heavy, high-tech manufacturing, just like electric electric vehicles, electric storage facilities, things of this nature. And this has been what they're focusing on. And because of these high-tech jobs, high-skilled as well, we're seeing these incentives that we touched on already, Ben, where they focus on the training and the support to make sure the workforce is also prepared to step into these jobs. And it's really a virtuous circle, if you think about it that way, where you take folks that might not have the skills they need right now, invest in them to take these jobs. Now we've got these backfill opportunities for folks that also want to get on that ladder, improve their own skills, and land up in a higher paying profession as well.
That's right. And those skills don't go away if they no longer work at the mega project, and the infrastructure that's built to train up that workforce benefits the entire state.
That's right.
So
That's right.
A lot of people may not be familiar with Oklahoma's Quality Jobs program, so we can kind of touch on that. That's been around since the early 1990s. It is a tax incentive for businesses, and there are some requirements about how many jobs it creates, or a project would create, that determines the level of the incentive. There's clawback provisions, meaning that if the things that are required to be done to get the incentive don't actually happen, the government can actually be reimbursed for the incentive. So talk about the success of that program, and just kind of take us through that if you could.
Sure, absolutely. So as part of our review and our analysis, we took a real close look at the performance of all of those quality jobs programs. The original one, the Small Business Quality Jobs Program, and also is the 21st Century Quality Job Program for more high-tech and more innovative opportunities. All of them have done well. The incentives that they've doled out have been sort of dwarfed in some situations by the tax revenue that they bring in. So overall, the programs have really been well run. And like I said before, they've had a nice return on investment for the state of Oklahoma. But the other things that are in place that I think are fantastic is there's a regular review. There's an independent commission that takes a look at these incentive programs, independent contractors that come in and evaluate their performance. So you've got this independent evaluation piece, and the state of Oklahoma has this independent oversight board that is constantly making recommendations and reviewing the efficacy and really how well those programs are working. That's a fantastic thing, and it really sets the state up for future success. And Ben, you mentioned the clawback provisions as well. There's real protection in there for the Oklahoma taxpayers. So if they were to get some of these incentive programs, and then perhaps they pick up and they relocate, or perhaps the business is no longer in operation, Oklahoma has strong mechanisms in place to get that money back. So the protections there are fantastic. So between the real oversight, the strong protections, and then also they're very flexible. That's something else to keep in mind as well. There's different scales, there's different tiers in there. They're available to a wide array of industries in Oklahoma. And these are established businesses and businesses that might relocate to the state. So that's a really important aspect as well. I think we should touch on that. It's not an either or situation where you incentivize new employers to the detriment of existing employers. There are incentive packages already in place in the state that can be utilized by pretty much anyone if they meet the right requirements and they follow up with the reporting and they do everything they're supposed to. So I think that the package of incentives that Oklahoma has right now has obviously served the state well. The only opportunity, I think, is to sort of ratchet it up and focus a little bit more on these mega sites while still protecting the employers that still exist in the state.
Yeah, that kind of gets to the recommendations in the report. What I found interesting in what you all found looking around the country is that because of the success of the quality jobs programs in Oklahoma and the strong oversight, all the things you laid out for us, Oklahoma is in a bit of an unusual but a very good competitive position in that we have a really strong base to work from. We just haven't tweaked it to add an arrow in our economic developers quiver to specifically target the mega projects. Whereas some other states that we're competing with for some of these sites are really kind of starting from scratch. They don't have a long history of successful incentive programs. And so but they do have maybe some mega project incentive. They just don't have the base underneath that. And so that really leads to your central recommendations in this, which I'll let you outline what they are, but
Sure.
The way I see them is essentially adding just another layer onto our existing successful program but a layer that is aimed specifically at mega projects.
Right. No, I think that's great. And that really is it. There's so much that Oklahoma does well. It's not a long list of recommendations, but certainly thinking about some of the changes you could consider, we start talking again about some of the higher level stuff, or I guess more abstract, about intentional strategic planning efforts, well-designed incentives, make sure you have clear goals and objectives, make sure they're measurable, include accountability. All of those things are wonderful, and the flexibility the state already has in place is like you indicated, that's a quiver, or that's an arrow in the quiver that some states don't have. But what's missing is really the strong mega site incentives, the recognition that these are transformational projects, and sometimes the competitive environment, it just is what it is. One of the legislators in Kansas described it as an arms race, essentially a Cold War with other states. And until the other states agree to de-escalate, states that don't ramp up their own incentive packages are going to be left behind. And since there is no prospect of states de-escalating anytime soon, it's very important that these states remain competitive and remain abreast of new innovations and new updates and new incentive packages. In addition to focusing on the mega sites themselves, there's really got to be a lot of coordination with the local economic developers, local officials. A lot of these mega sites include land conveyance, options for some of these people, local property tax breaks. So really the most competitive states are coordinating and collaborating, not just at the state government level, but all the way down to the local level, to make sure they can put together the most comprehensive, best package in front of these potential investors. And I think Oklahoma is in a good place to start doing the same.
Yeah, and we've seen some movement, Brian, in there's some legislation that's been introduced in Oklahoma, and I know you haven't looked specifically at that legislation, but it would do some of the things that we found in this report would be positive towards attracting mega sites. So it's good to see that there's Oklahoma policymakers are thinking in that direction and taking quick action. Wanted to also highlight real fast, just to drive home the impact of these mega sites. If you could tell us about the economic modeling that you did in the report, that it kind of gave a hypothetical mega project somewhere in Oklahoma, and explain how you do the modeling, and then also what the results were for the state.
Sure. So we did some hypothetical modeling. There's several economic models we can apply, but usually we have a subscription service called to EMZ, which is the Economic Modeling Specialist. It's all kinds of data, does some good models, and gives us some output that we can base things off of. And one of the options is to essentially enter a what if scenario. So you pick an industry, which in our situation, we chose a tech heavy industry. It doesn't really matter which one, but the idea being that we wanted to find a good one that represented sort of the next generation of heavy tech industry and manufacturing. And that was electric vehicle battery facilities. And again, don't get too wrapped up in that, but these are the type of projects that people are landing. And when we look at that, we estimate that there'll be 4,500 initial jobs. That's the only thing we enter ourselves. Okay, if we land a mega site that has 4,500 people employed, what is the impact? Well, we went through and we found that altogether, we could look at about $43 million in increased tax revenue every single year. So that goes from the local, the state, to the federal level, all of which are right around 15 million, comes around 43 million all said and done. That's an annual increase in tax revenue. And that's to say nothing of the jobs. In addition to the 4,500 potential initial jobs created by the megasite project itself, we're looking in the neighborhood of anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 additional jobs added through the supply chain, through industries that are set up to support the suppliers. So an awkward way to say it, but is the supply chain's supply chain. All these suppliers have their own folks they work with. So they're going to generate new jobs down that as well. And we've already talked about the induced impact, where you're going to need, more restaurants, more hotels, more accommodation, leisure time activities, to say nothing of government jobs that are going to be necessary to support all of the additional taxes and revenue and monitoring and processes. So all told, you could see, in the neighborhood of $500 million generated in wages on an annual basis. So it's a huge number with a mind-boggling impact that could have on the region. And we went through, and this model is all vetted. It's been used in other areas as well. And it really cuts right to the chase and lays out these what-if scenarios. If we're able to attract this, what's the impact on our economy?
Yeah, and encourage everyone who's taking a look at the report to look at those models in the report. It's just really eye-popping as to just what landing one of these mega sites, mega projects can do for a region and for a state. And of course, having the right economic development tools, hopefully you could attract more than one. I just really encourage people to look at those figures. So as we wrap up, Brian, do you want to just leave us with general thoughts about where Oklahoma's at and what you see in the future?
Sure. I see really great things for Oklahoma. I mean, as we've labored, to try to make sure we brought out in the report, the system in place is a good one. It's flexible, had a good return on investment. So I think that adding these mega site incentives and expanding the flexibility and perhaps even the opportunity to braid some of these funding programs or stack and let people draw from multiple incentive programs if they qualify, I think is really a good thing to consider and a great way to move forward for Oklahoma. And I think, as you've indicated already, Ben, it's really a virtuous thing. So you land one mega site project, you get the workforce trained up to do everything they need. That's going to lead to other folks coming in as well. And it's not a matter of stealing one worker from the other, but you become a focus and a hub and becomes a destination. And all of a sudden, you're not worried about brain drain from your own region, but people from all across the country are coming into Oklahoma to get these jobs because the opportunity is there. Like I said, it's not either or, and it's not a chicken or an egg thing, really. You got to have the opportunities for folks to come in. So I think that the future looks very bright, and I think that Oklahoma is very progressive and forward thinking, first in doing this study and then actively considering the changes that are necessary to the legislation.
Well, that's a great way to sum up. And Brian, just want to let you know, we really appreciate your work on this and the opportunity to partner with Thomas P. Miller and Associates. You guys do great work and all around the country. And so we've really enjoyed our partnership and look forward to working together more in the future.
That's great. Thank you, Ben. We really enjoyed working with you guys. I think it was a great project, and my goodness, you guys were fantastic. So we appreciate that.